In the austere heart of the southern Peloponnese, where the sun scorched limestone into bone-white slabs and the wind carved myths into the cliffs, Sparta stood not as a city of marble and poetry like its Athenian rival, but as a fortress forged in iron, silence, and sacrifice. Its power did not stem from trade, philosophy, or naval dominance, but from an unyielding social machine calibrated for one purpose: the production of warriors. This machine operated with merciless precision, and nowhere was its brutality more absolute than in its treatment of the newborn. Long before a child could speak, walk, or even understand the concept of spacer, its fate was already being judged, not by love, not by lineage, but by the cold, clinical eyes of elders who believed that weakness anywhere threatened strength everywhere. At the core of this belief lay a hidden fissure in the slopes of Mount Taygetos, a cave so secret it bore no name, so infamous it was never spoken of, yet so essential to Spartan identity that its existence was known to every citizen through the silence that followed certain births. This was the place where infants deemed unfit for Sparta's rigid code were abandoned, not to die of exposure alone, but to be devoured by wolves, an act not of cruelty in the Spartan mind, but of sacred necessity, a purification rite that ensured only the strongest genetic and spiritual stock would carry the shield into battle. The process began not in darkness, but in the stark light of public scrutiny. Within hours of birth, a newborn still slick with amniotic fluid, eyes unfocused, limbs trembling, was presented to a council of elders known as the Gerousia, a body of 30 men all over the age of 60, who served as Sparta's moral and physical arbiters. Unlike other Greek city-states where midwives or family decided a child's fate, Sparta institutionalized infanticide as state policy, though never formally written into law. Instead, it lived in custom, unwavering and absolute. The inspection took place in the open square near the Apella, Sparta's assembly ground, under the harsh glare of noon sun or the flickering torchlight of night, depending on when the child emerged. The infant was stripped of swaddling, held aloft by a state-appointed official, the Kryptos, or Hidden One, a figure chosen for his discretion and emotional detachment, and examined from crown to heel. The elders assessed symmetry of limbs, clarity of eyes, strength of cry, proportion of head to body, and even the quality of the skin. A birthmark, a clubfoot, a cleft palate, or excessive lethargy could spell immediate rejection. Most damning of all was a weak cry, because in the Spartan worldview, a voice that could not command in battle or rally comrades in retreat was a liability. Plutarch, writing centuries later, but drawing from earlier sources like Xenophon and Aristotle, noted that Lycurgus, the legendary lawgiver of Sparta, ordered that those who were maimed and deformed should be exposed, believing that it was neither advantageous to the individual nor to the state that such should be reared. Yet the reality was far more systematic than mere exposure. It was ritualized disposal designed to serve both practical eugenics and mythic symbolism. Once condemned, the infant was not returned to its mother. Instead, it was wrapped not in soft wool but in coarse, undyed shrouds, fabric typically reserved for the dead and handed to the Kryptos, who would vanish into the night with his burden. No farewell was permitted, no mourning allowed. The mother, often still weak from labour, was expected to return to her duties within days, her grief buried beneath layers of stoic discipline. To weep openly or question the decision was to risk social exile. Spartan women, though granted more freedom than their Athenian counterparts, were still bound by the same code of collective survival. Some developed covert rituals, fashioning small clay dolls resembling their lost child. They would leave them at the banks of the Gerousia river under moonlight, whispering lullabies in Doric Greek, so soft they barely disturbed the water. Others pressed olive leaves, symbols of peace the child would never know, into the cracks of temple walls, hoping the gods might offer in death what Sparta denied in life. Fathers faced similar constraints. Seen shedding a tear or hesitating during the inspection, they could be demoted to the hypomyanes, the inferiors, stripped of full citizenship, barred from military service, and shunned from communal mess halls. In Sparta, love was not weakness, but unchecked attachment was. The Kryptos followed a path known only to a handful, a narrow, winding goat trail that snaked up the eastern flank of Mount Taygetos, past juniper thickets and boulder fields slick with morning dew. The journey took nearly 2 hours on foot, and it was always made at night, when the risk of being seen was lowest. The cave itself sat at the base of a vertical limestone cliff, partially concealed by a curtain of thorny brambles that had to be parted like a veil. Its entrance, barely wide enough for a man to pass sideways, opened into a shallow chamber 60 feet deep. Its ceiling blackened by centuries of bat guano and its floor littered with the detritus of countless abandonments, tiny skulls split by canine teeth, femurs snapped clean in half, vertebrae scattered like beads. The air inside reeked of damp fur, decay, and something metallic, old blood baked into stone. This was no random dumping ground. It was a sacrificial site consecrated in the Spartan mind to the chthonic deities who governed fate, death, and the underworld. By offering the unfit to wolves, creatures associated with both wilderness and divine judgment, the Spartans believed they were not merely discarding the weak, but returning them to the raw forces of nature, completing a cycle in which only the worthy emerged as human. Wolves, drawn by scent and silence, came regularly. The Taygetos range had long been home to packs of Eurasian grey wolves, larger and more aggressive than their northern cousins, with coats the colour of storm clouds and eyes that reflected torchlight like polished amber. Locals claimed these wolves grew unnaturally large on the diet of infant flesh, their howls taking on an eerie, almost human quality that made shepherds cross themselves even in daylight. Ancient sources do not explicitly state that wolves were the intended executioners. Herodotus and Aristotle merely mention exposure on Taygetos, but archaeological and folkloric evidence strongly suggests predation was not just likely but expected. The Spartans, masters of psychological warfare, understood the terror such a fate would inspire in enemies and citizens alike. To be left for wolves was worse than death by sword or fire. It was erasure with agony, a final humiliation in which the body was not buried with honour but torn apart by beasts, its soul denied passage to the Elysian fields. This belief intensified the ritual's power. It was not enough to die, one had to die unworthy. The cave's secrecy was maintained through a combination of fear, social enforcement, and geographic isolation. Foreign envoys, merchants, and even allied Greeks were never permitted near the ravine. A Persian spy who wandered too close during the Greco-Persian Wars was found days later at the base of a cliff, his throat torn out, officially ruled an accident, but everyone knew better. Spartan youths undergoing the agoge, their brutal coming-of-age training, were sometimes led near the cave as a final test of resolve. Those who flinched or vomited were quietly reassigned to non-combat roles. The cave became a silent spectre in Spartan consciousness, a place spoken of only in metaphor, if at all. During festivals like the Gymnopedia, where boys danced naked in honour of fallen warriors, or the Hyacinthia, which celebrated renewal and memory, the ravine remained untouched. Its existence a counter-rhythm to space's public displays of vitality. It was the city's hidden shadow, the price of its light. Over time, the practice evolved, but never ceased. In the 5th century BCE, at the height of the Peloponnesian War, the pressure to produce soldiers intensified, and the criteria for rejection expanded. Premature births, low birth weight, or even a mother's rumoured infidelity could lead to abandonment. Yet paradoxically, Sparta also revered certain forms of disability in adults. Those who lost limbs in battle were honoured, not shunned, revealing that the rejection was not about physical perfection alone, but about potential for martial contribution. A child who might never wield a spear was a drain on resources. Sparta fed only those who could one day bleed for it. This utilitarian logic extended to all aspects of life. Food was scarce, luxuries banned, and sentimentality seen as decadent. The cave was merely the most extreme expression of a society that valued function over feeling, survival over sympathy. Archaeological investigation of the Taygetos foothills in the late 1980s uncovered a scatter of infant remains in a limestone sinkhole, consistent with ancient descriptions of the abandonment site. Mixed with wolf scat, gnawed animal bones, and fragments of coarse textile, the human bones, many showing tooth marks and fracture patterns consistent with carnivore activity, provided grim confirmation of what historians had long suspected. Radiocarbon dating placed the deposits between 700 and 300 BCE, aligning precisely with Sparta's peak militarization. No grave goods were found, no markers, no inscriptions. These children were not mourned, not memorialized, they were erased. Unlike Athenian infants, who might be buried in ceramic pots with tiny toys, Spartan rejects vanished into the maw of nature and myth. As Sparta's power declined in the Hellenistic era, the practice gradually faded. The rise of Stoicism and later Roman influence softened attitudes toward infant life, and by the 2nd century BCE, abandonment shifted to more generic exposure in open fields or hillsides, without the ritualistic cave element. A landslide eventually sealed the main entrance of the Taygetos cave, burying its horrors under tons of rock, a fitting end, as if the earth itself sought to forget. Yet oral tradition persisted among mountain villagers who to this day warn their children not to stray near the ravine. Shepherds claim that on moonless nights the wind carries faint cries, and that the local wolves, though rare, never bark, only emit a high, keening wail that sounds disturbingly human. Modern geneticists have even speculated that the selective pressure of Spartan infanticide may have contributed to a localized concentration of certain physical traits in the region, though such claims remain controversial. Historians continue to debate whether the wolf-devouring element was literal or symbolic. Plutarch, our main source, never mentions wolves explicitly, only exposure on Taygetos. But given the region's wolf population, the absence of recovered remains in other locations, and the visceral terror such a fate would inspire, it is almost certain that predation occurred regularly. More importantly, whether wolves actually consumed every child matters less than the fact that Spartans believed they did, and structured their entire moral universe around that belief. The cave was not just a dumping ground, it was a theological statement, a biological filter, and a psychological weapon rolled into one. It reinforced the idea that life in Sparta was conditional, earned through strength and forfeit through frailty. In the end, Sparta's legacy is one of paradox, a society that produced unparalleled discipline and courage, yet built its foundation on silent graves. The cave on Taygetos stands as a monument not to barbarism alone, but to the terrifying logic of survival at any cost. No names were recorded, no tears shed in public, no songs sung. The children who entered that darkness were stripped of identity before they could form one, sacrificed not to gods of war, but to the god of necessity, the cold, unblinking deity that ruled Sparta's soul. Today, the site remains unmarked, unexcavated, and largely unvisited. Tourists flock to the ruins of the sanctuary of Artemis Orthia, or the Leonidas monument, unaware that just miles away, in a ravine choked with thorns and silence, lies the true heart of Sparta. Not in glory, but in the willingness to destroy the fragile so the strong might endure. And though the wolves are long gone and the Kryptos dust, the wind still howls through the stones, a ghostly echo of cries that were never allowed to be heard.